just delighted to be here with you today with my colleague and I would say by now also dear friend Laura Arminda Kingsley in the occasion of her performance in the framework of the 2024 Venice Biennale. The performance took place yesterday, the 24th of July 2024 at Ponte San Lorenzo here in Venice, where we are now. And now I'm very happy because we are sharing this moment together to reflect on the specific artwork and through it in kind of a kaleidoscopic way or also on your wider artistic practice. But I would like to take a moment now to first briefly introduce you. So, Laura Arminda Kingsley, American-born Dominican artist based in Switzerland, where we met actually a couple of years ago while serving together on the advisory board for the exhibition Stranger in the Village at the Aargauer Kunsthaus in between 2022 and 2023. And Laura works across a variety of media: painting, sculpture, installation, animation, and as we have seen yesterday, also performance. And through her practice, she invites viewers to think outside of paradigms of social separation, categorization, and othering. Of course, as we all know, historically rooted in Western systems and notions of discrimination, from colonial ideologies to structural and individual racism and sexism. And I really like how you frame in other descriptions of your work, how you turn around the often heard and often excluding question, where do you come from? And you choose instead to reflect on the more wide-reaching and probably more urgent question, where do we all come from? And so you redirect your attention to an exploration of the role played by humans and between humans, together of course with other living forms in the history of the world, in the history of the earth. And this you do splendidly, I might add, through a not exclusive but a particular focus on the elements of and concepts of the ocean, the sea, and bodies of water, intended parallelly as creators of life, as repositories of past histories, memories, and bodies, and also as trans-historical and trans-geographical versions and vectors of connections between people, places, and times. And I mean, although you draw inspiration from a very wide variety of discourses and disciplines to create a very layered aesthetic and a rich thematic spectrum, I was so fascinated, and I am so fascinated by your visual language, which is vividly characterized by deep sea ambiences and atavist atmospheres, where these living ecosystems take shape out of the fusion between human figures and microorganism-looking creatures, cohabiting and thriving undisturbed in the deep darkness, we could say. I hope you're happy with my characterization, with my description.
Thank you so much for the beautiful introduction, Rosa. And yeah, cara Rosa. I mean, for me, it's, the feeling is very much mutual. I'm very glad that our paths converged, you know, sort of came together at that point when we're working in Stranger in the Village, and that out of our conversations and sort of mutual discovery of our mutual interest, then organically collaboratory practice evolved, right? Very, very glad to have you in my professional and personal life.
Yes, definitely likewise.
And now I'm gonna give people an idea of who you are, even if it's just a glimpse into the multifaceted academic and individual that you are. So Rosa Sancarlo is an Italian-born, internationally educated art historian. She's conducting her PhD studies at the University of Zurich, where she's the assistant of the chair of modern and contemporary art at the Art Historical Institute. Her current research explores the artistic expressions born out of the interaction between Afro-diasporic peoples, their cultures, and the Western context, plural. It's a very important detail. So her research spans Western Europe, but also Western North America and the United States. She's a founding member of CARA, the Collective for Anti-Racist Art History. And Rosa is an essential collaborator to my performance project in the roles of curating advisor and also as an art historical specialist.
Thank you for the lovely introduction. I feel empowered and energized. So I was thinking that we can maybe just break the ice by me asking you if you're happy with how the performance went yesterday.
You know,
pause.
Pause. I tend to be very self-critical, but I think it is definitely a step in the right direction that I pushed through, being very much outside of my comfort zone in terms of artistic production, which I regularly do in all the different mediums that I work in, but there was an element of putting my body in this public space and using the racialization of my body. I think of it as weaponizing the racialization of my body to open up this discourse, these large discourses that take place in my private life, whether I want it or not, as I navigate these public spaces. But also, I wanted to contribute to the conversation. And, you know, through looking at Kate Lowe's research on Afro-diasporic and formerly enslaved African men who had worked with gondoliers, and also looking at the wonderful film that's being presented in the Biennale, We Were Here. I had a lot, this was a performance where I had so much reflection on how can I invite the public to have this process of discovery and this change of perspective when you understand that the presence of African people and Afro-diasporic peoples in Europe is not a new phenomena. We are not a new addition. It has contributed to the culture. It has always, or it has not always, but it has been there for a really long time. And of course, because I like to think in terms of deep time a lot, it has always been there because everyone is Afro-diasporic from a genetical point of view.
Going back to the question, where do we all come from?
Where do we all come from? Which is, to me, the more interesting question. And yeah, so in that sense, I do think I'm very glad that I made myself perform that very, for me, very physically challenging piece. You know, it's like, my body was covered in this very uncomfortable, oily substance. And I think as I was working on the performance, I tested lots of different materials. And I think there was an element of that discomfort, that discomfort was also important. The fact after I had recuperated somewhat, and you know, the whole conversation was also this term blanqueamiento and the opposite of desblanqueamiento. Blanqueamiento is in Brazil, in the Dominican Republic, in many Latin American countries, the powers that be, the governments, and at times the dictatorial governments, the colonial governments, would encourage the migration of European immigrants through, land, giving people land, giving people certain living conditions, which of course helped a lot of people that were in dire circumstances in Europe. The idea was that those European immigrants would bring their genes and sort of widen the population. In the Dominican Republic was particular, the term was to better the race. And there's a deep discomfort that comes from that. It's the deep discomfort of seeing Blackness, Africanness as something that needs to be improved on, almost. That was the ideological context. So in the performance, I was doing a Desblanqueamiento, an unwhitening. So there was the removal of the blanqueamiento as a very uncomfortable space, also thinking about whitewashing of history in particular. That's why it's in Ponte San Lorenzo. We will get into that detail. But yeah, so there was the removal of this uncomfortable program of blanqueamiento, and the sort of physical removal of this very uncomfortable layer of sticky white material that was all over my body.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for that, for those insights that really start to unpack all the different layers and associations and contexts and reflections that are the foundations of your complex performance. Just to give, to offer a visualization of the performance to people who might not have encountered it yet or read on it yet. The performance enacts a process of revelation. Revelation from the personification of the Virgin Mary to the personification of Jemaja. Personifications manifested and evoked through, in, and on your body, through actions of uncovering of your veiled body and through the cleansing of the white paint on your body with the water of the canal that you gathered with an higuero. Exactly. Italian pronunciation. And I was very taken by this. Maybe the first action that you do when you arrive at the canal. You take off the veil. You gather the water from the canal, and then you dip the veil into the water. We can read this series of actions in many different ways. For me, the way that the reading that resonated more was the action of permeating this material attribute, the veil, connoting the body in a certain prescribed way, if you will, with all the layers of meanings, stories, experiences, we could say condensed, imprinted, gathered, and collected into the memory of the water. Do you know what I mean? And so maybe I wanted to just ask if this reading resonates with you, and what do you think about it?
Could you repeat the reading just briefly?
Yes. It was kind of a brainstorming, half brainstorming. Think about it as an encounter.
Yeah.
You dipping the veil into the water of the canal. For me, it manifests an action of permeating the material attribute, the material object of the veil that connotes the body in a very precise and prescribed way.
Yeah.
With like a sort of inscription of this object with all the meanings and stories and experiences that are condensed and gathered and collected into the water and its memory.
Yeah.
Does it resonate?
That does resonate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, the veil is prescribed, but it's a covering.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way, the Desblanqueamiento is a covering.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's the sense of you become this. It was going from these archetypes and this sort of prescribed, constructed identity. For example, Catholicism. Also thinking about syncretism, which is very strong and alive in the Caribbean. And just thinking about how the discovering this Desblanqueamiento of Yemoya as the Virgin Mary, I wanted to do that revelation, you know. So the removal of the veil was like the first moment where you see color, where the hair just becomes hair. There's a moment of revelation there, and then of course activated with the water. The water is also a recurring theme in my whole practice, but it's also, for me, a connecting material. It connects us to the cosmos, to each other, to everything that's alive, because that same water has been filtered through the bodies of everything that has ever lived on this planet. And that includes, in this case, because of, you know, also the location, it includes the people that were here that had been sort of whitewashed out of history. You know, it's a sense of they're still here, which is why the water was also the revelatory mechanism.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's sort of like the medium that I used to remove that uncomfortable, sticky white paint, that patina. That was all over my body.
Definitely, that was a patina. Definitely.
It was a patina, and and also, of course, the salt water. It has there's this Dominican joke that if you really want to know what your girlfriend is like, you take her to the beach.
Okay.
Because then the hair is gonna be on her salt. The salt water is gonna come on her hair. She won't have makeup on, and you'll see what her hair is really like.
Okay.
And it's kind of a revelation of, you know, what Alix wrote, the black behind the ear, right? All of the sort of products there, like used to straighten and whiten the hair to do the daily blanqueamiento of the hair are removed by the salt water, right? So there was also like this image of revelation, transformation, because I knew the salt water was going to react with my hair, with the fabric, with everything. That's very interesting. You never told me that. So that's okay. Well, if some Dominicans might ever invite me to the beach, I will know what they want. No, but I'm happy that you touched upon the notion of water, because I mean the bodies of water, the history of water, notions and concepts like the ocean and the sea are really fundamental, not only to this performance of yours, but are very fundamental and recurring to your practice. I would love to go back to the performance, because we could say that the performance was site-specific, or at least, you know, site-based, because it was performed, as we have mentioned, at Ponte San Lorenzo here in Venice,
because this bridge and its square were the scenario for Giovanni Bellini's characteristic Renaissance painting, The Miracle of the Cross at Ponte San Lorenzo, one of your most explicit sources of inspiration for this performance. And this painting is known within the art historical scholarship for being one of the most known painting from the Italian Renaissance that depicts a man of African descent in a Venetian landscape, and the common interpretation for the identity of this man is seeing him as a servant trying to help retrieve the cross. And so there was a lot of history, a lot of biography within this urban setting, and I wanted to just ask how it felt to relate in the performance moment with that urban context, its history, but also the dynamics of the public space, because there was a lot going on yesterday morning. There was a lot going on. Not all of that was under our control. And I kind of wanted to have a sense from you if you felt it more as a way to dialogue with not only the history of that urban space, but with the daily life of that urban space, or if it was more of a disturbance.
I saw it as a challenge. There was a lot of movement and noise and traffic, and you know, some interactions that were not necessarily wanted. There was a well-meaning lady who came over to me and was like, "So what are you supposed to be?" And I'm like,
that was a little bit aggressive.
Yes, but I think that's part of what we discussed earlier about navigating certain landscapes as a racialized person. You get a lot of unwarranted interactions at times. So, you know, I kind of gracefully explained to her what we're doing, but it was, or as gracefully as I could.
It was very graceful.
Moment. But, you know, it was definitely, the environment, it felt quite hostile, because there was all of this staring and all these noises, and the people were moving recycling materials, people were transporting things. There was even, later I found out there was ambulances going by. I think that that's definitely an enrichment to the performance, because it takes Venice away from this sort of idyllic, sort of frozen in time, you know, this stereotype of Venice, and it brings it into this rich historical place, but that's very much a contemporary space.
Yes.
Where people live, and also where a lot of the those dynamics of history are still being played out. You know, we had also talked about in detail about Desblanqueamiento and how it also happened in Italy, to a different extent, under different circumstances. So I felt that was very, it was challenging, but I thought that definitely if everything had gone perfectly, it wouldn't have had that level of tension that it had for me. I really had to block everything out and do what felt like a very, very intense effort to stay in the performance, and at the same time that is not a completely alien feeling to me of having to block things out of my daily life. There was this thing of, you know, in Switzerland we have this, it's a well-known issue with being stared at when you look a certain way, in a very intense sort of way that can become invasive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you live there for a long time, so have you learned to block that out.
Mm-hmm.
So some of that going on.
Okay.
So that's, you know, thinking about it, reflecting on it, there's a parallel. And yeah, I mean, there was some, it was a very, very embodied experience too, because of all of the, I had, you know, planned a lot for it, but then the level of discomfort made the water even more of a revelatory, transformative, almost healing thing. Yeah.
I find it extreme. Sorry.
Yeah, and liberating, right? It liberated me from
yes
everything that was
that
was happening externally and internally and in my body. But
that's quite interesting. It's a nuance that we hadn't explicitly touched upon yet in our conversations. The fact that without wanting it, I guess, or planning it as a main goal, the dynamics and the I might say also like sensations of the performance were probably more close, more nearer than expected to some dynamics in your daily life, and that's telling. That's telling, especially in this kind of transhistorical perspective, not wanting only to like reflect on a past, on a past moment, but also wanting to actually see the reverberations of that past moment in our daily life. So that's a whole other quite interesting layer, I'd say. Do you want to add something? Otherwise,
no, and it's also the connection of being said. I keep saying in my daily life, but I think it's important to also know that this is very much a case of the intimate being political.
Yeah.
And it not being just my daily life, but like a systemic issue, a recurring sort of social interaction that happens to lots of people from extremely diverse backgrounds that through this classification are confronted with different kinds of sort of abrasive interactions in the daily lives.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes. Now, one crucial element activating your performance was the iguero, in which, as we mentioned, you gathered the water from the canal, you dipped the veil in this action of uncovering, cleansing, and revelation. And I'd like to really expand a little bit on the meanings and the possible readings and the biographies of this special container. Can I call it a container or a bowl in your performance, but also probably in your artistic practice, in your artistic history?
Yeah, so actually, igueros are a very special type of container. This particular one I cultivated with my father in his farm. You know, here you see where it grows from the tree. We cut it down, we cut it in half, we empty it, I dried it. It's a container, it's a bowl, but it's also the Taino, which were the inhabitants of the Dominican Republic, there is Hispaniola, also Haiti, and other parts of the Caribbean before Spanish arrival. They also used it as a bowl, but also as a container. As a container is believed as a container in ritualistic practices. you also see similar calabash, organic sort of containers being used to make instruments. For example, in Senegal, the instruments of the griots, of the oral historians. You see it also in Asian traditions. You see multiple traditions and myths around the world that involved a calabash or an iguero, which is the Arawak word for it, becoming the symbol of a womb, becoming the symbol of the origin of life on Earth, right? So for me, it's a very charged type of container, and in the performance, I had carried it as if it were my womb, hidden in the dress, and dropped it from the dress, and then dipped it in the canal to gather the water. So it becomes kind of a conduit or an extension representation of the body, right? And it's also for me a way to connect with Taino and also West African ritualistic practice and also daily rituals, which is it's a grounding element within the performance.
Yeah, definitely. I really like the fact that it's probably like not one of the most explicit and manifest attributes of the performance, because at the first glance it just can be perceived as quote-unquote only as a container, and then you can kind of discover the layers and the history and the possible different meanings and associations, and that's a whole other chapter. That's a whole other, door that you can open to gather other meanings and histories and reflections. So,
and it was, if I may interrupt, it was also like it dropped from the sort of impersonation of the Madonna, of the Virgin Mary, right? So it's also connecting this very important Christian myth of the birth of the Savior with creation myths from other cultures that are also equally influential and informing to me already from a formational sort of technique point of view. So there was also that of sort of, that's something that I find fruitful in my practice and continue to do. That's like creating these bridges within things that we have long perceived as disparate or sometimes as even opposite, and finding those commonalities. I think it's there's an equalized. It's not just equalized in the sense that it all becomes same, but it creates a balance of power. A sort of flat hierarchy in a way.
And shared connections. Like figures that have been developed within spiritual and religious frameworks to think and reflect and celebrate something so existential as like creation of life, motherly love and value and so on and so forth. And here is and that's like for me an extremely powerful connection between these personas. You start your performance with and you finish it with, the Virgin Mary and Ejemaja. So thank you for that. Maybe I would love to ask the kind of the last question that I have specific to the performance, and then we can maybe space out a little bit more. And that is a very expected canonical question that needs to be asked, though, and that is how you position and you situate your performance within the framework of the 2024 Venice Biennale, you know, and by that I mean especially the conceptual framework underlying Pedrosa's concept for the central pavilions of stranieri ovunque, foreigners everywhere, as we all know, revolving around the many possible meanings of feeling but also being identified as foreigners.
Mm-hmm.
How does the performance play, respond, situate herself into this discursive, into this discourse that right now is permeating Venice?
So when I first got the news that Adriano Pedrosa was going to curate the Biennale as the first curator from Latin America to curate the Venice Biennale, I was, you know, there was a moment of, okay, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Then I read this concept of foreigners everywhere. And my first reaction when I saw the words foreigners everywhere was like, foreigners, like, you know, I had been.
What do you mean?
I had been, you know, it was at the time when I was very much working through Stranger in the Village and Baldwin's reflections of how sort of racialization can make you a foreigner everywhere, while making those higher up in the this artificial hierarchy, making them not be a stranger anywhere, right?
Yeah.
So first I read it, I was like, foreigners everywhere, you know, and, oh, you know, but then I engaged with the work from the artist collective Claire Fontaine, and okay, and then I understood, okay, this is the concept, and he has this strategy, and there's gonna be this this opportunity for a different art historical perspective that includes what we now call the Global South, to be introduced into the art historical canon of what we now call the Global North. So I was very excited with this idea, and I was like, oh, I felt a strong desire to participate in this conversation. And then I had already, of course, had previous experiences with Venice that I thought were very inspiring. I understood it also as a place that I wanted to engage with because of its rich history, because of its deep and irrevocable connection with water and its conflict with water in a way. So I was like, I have to speak. There's one of those moments where, you know, when there is a conversation with really interesting people and you can't bear not to speak.
Yeah.
I had that.
Yeah.
And so I engaged with as much information as I could gather about the premise of the Biennale, the context, and also did a lot of, with your help as well, a lot of research about the African presence in Venice, because I had already had the experience of wandering through the city by myself and finding all of this reference to Moors and about the schiavi and, you know, the slaves, and to all of these visuals of this fetishized, racialized visuals of melanated, of black people.
But also normalized.
Normalized.
And presented in the most harmless way. I'm sorry if I interrupted, but I wanted to say, because we were like yesterday at dinner, like, that was in front of our eyes.
And these are things that, for me, I see these things, you know, for me it's never going to be normal to see black people as decoration, right? So,
and here I must say, for a long time for me it was normal, because I have been socialized in a certain way, with certain privileges and biases, and partial thoughts and convictions. And it takes conversations, confrontations, and open-ended process of deconstruction. Yes. And this is part of it. And so, yes.
And also, I mean, also for me, like I was also, no, I think I have yet to come across a culture who's free of prejudice.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was also raised with ideas that I had to claw my way out of. You know, I had to work my way out of, and also, yeah, because of our colonial heritage, we're not free of problematic representations in media, in art. Yes, definitely. And of course, as a child, you're in this context where this is normalized, and also the way in which people interact with other people becomes normalized, and at some point you realize, wait a minute, this is very much a detrimental thing to even to myself, right? So yes, I just have to do it, and I had to figure out how to do it. So there was a lot of research and thought about how can I contribute to this conversation?
And you did, and you're doing it. In a kind of a DIY, do-it-yourself way, and that's empowering for me.
Me too.
Yeah.
I mean, as we were discussing over a beautiful view the other day, you know, there's an important realization that being an artist, being in a historical, the art world is an entrepreneurial space. And if you feel a strong need to participate in a conversation, you shouldn't. It's not always feasible to wait for someone to invite you to sit at the table. You might have to ask or set your own table. And that's in effect what we did. What we are doing. Yes.
Yes, I think now maybe it's a good moment to space out a little bit more and think a little bit about your wider practice, artistic practice. I am quite fascinated by your depiction of the human figures populating your compositions across a variety of different media and materials, as we said. Especially since the beginning, I was quite intrigued to notice how in your practice you oscillate between depicting your human figures with extremely figurative, realistic, detailed facial features that sometimes we could say even really dominate the whole compositions. Right now I'm thinking, for example, about the first painting in Murmurs of the Deep, in the Murmurs of the Deep series. Exactly. Oscillating between that and a total lack of facial features, a total blankness, a total, I'm following kind of my notes, a total suspension, a total obfuscation of facial features. Right now I'm thinking about the sculpture, Murmurs of the Deep, I Remember Being You. And so I would love to ask you, what is the reflection or the reasoning behind this choice between facelessness and facefulness, this term that I am deciding to poetically introduce into the English language. Exactly.
I love it. We should coin that term.
All right.
I think this, as I read that, it is a very productive term, facelessness and facefulness. That arises from thinking about two different perspectives. So Murmurs of the Deep, in the ceramic sculptures, I Remember Being You, there's a facelessness because it is the back of a human bosco being mirrored in a kind of organic symmetry. And then depending from which angle it's looked at, then we're reminded of different forms. Some of them are some of the first animals in the fossil record, like the Gansonia costata. Other, it might remind you of a coconut shell, it might remind you of the shell of a nautilus, and then you discover the ear, and you see all of the back of the ear here, where we have all of these vestigial muscles that come from what our animal ancestors that look nothing like us. They did not have this face. So facelessness usually arises from me thinking about very ancient moments in our evolutionary process when we did not have this face. And then on the other side of the spectrum, the facefulness, and sometimes there's a bounty of faces. That's more thinking about us in connection to the microbiome and the many different layers of existence that necessitated or, that resulted in our presence, but also that we interact with in a very intimate way for our existence that we necessitate to survive as well. And then the facefulness is about inviting the viewer to recognize themselves in this microbial, spatial looking living forms. Because we humans see faces in a lot of things because we're seeking recognitions, and I think when our gaze is met by another face in a painting, there's a conversation there. It's like eye to eye that's quite different. And I'm trying to invite people to have that same eye to eye conversation with other living forms that don't have that face.
That's super interesting that you're saying this, because, and that leads exactly to my next question that still lingers on your beautifully full-bodied human figures and their poses. Very often unexpected, contorted, tense poses, sotto in su, sopra in giù, both in like the poses of the bodies of the figures, but also how you position them within on the painterly surface, within the represented compositions, in connection and dialogue with the viewers. For me, they were extremely engaging, but also because you have to linger on these poses, these positions, and so I just wanted to ask you, like, what is behind there?
So, this sort of foreshortening of the figure, or discorso, it's a lot about me thinking about the figure in space, and also wanting to show alternative views of the human figure where we might recognize other shapes, and we don't always, the figures then become not as easy to predict as they would be in the views in which we observe each other in our daily lives, right? The perspective that we have on each other. Exactly. A part of that is also a big influence in my work as well from Michelangelo, Rodin, Hieronymus Bosch, and this, and also Clotius, and these figures that are kind of like, in the case of Michelangelo and Clotius in particular, they're like kind of flying in space. And in the Sistine Chapel, you have Michelangelo, just like, it's like reaching God in a sense, but if you get rid of this patriarchal, anthropomorphical image of God, then connecting with life itself, with the particles that make everything, there's a spiritual element in that, and that also plays a role. It's the figures connecting to the universe,
Yeah.
like Ana Mendieta says,
Yeah.
right? Through art, I reestablish the bonds that connect me to the universe, and for me, I want to extend that through my art. I hope to invite others to reestablish the bonds that connect them to the universe.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that in your answers you always like already automatically go to my next questions. Like you're doing
Really?
a job for me. I'm loving it. I'm like enjoying it. And so to my next question. It's extremely interesting to follow your reasonings and through them actively changing these perspectives. We are, or at least me. I am born in and socialized in, and this also thinking about where to find spiritual meanings and values and so on and so forth. It's really resonating. Let's linger a little bit further on Ana Mendieta, because we have talked about how you see her work as having many affinities with yours. Especially one of the specific references that you gave me was her performance Nile Born, and how I might say it was an inspiration, like a source of inspiration for your own performance. And very briefly, in this performance, she took the form of a human silhouette covered in sand from the Nile River, if I'm not mistaken, to kind of connect her body with earth and explore how her body would shape the earth and vice versa, and through that to reflect on fragility and the ephemerality of encounters between the human bodies and nature. In your performance here in Venice, we can see a similar dynamic, a related dynamic of confrontation and interrelation with the natural element. In your case, the natural element is water. But I do know that earth plays a role in your practice, especially in your I would say, love, fascination, engagement with ceramics. And so I guess I wanted to just ask, starting from your relationship with water, what's your relationship with earth within your artistic practice?
Yeah,
if there is one,
There is a relationship with earth. For me, ceramics is a very special medium, very close to my heart. Because when I was claiming my art historical education, I realized that looking at art history through the lens of marble sculptures and oil paintings was a very fruitful exercise if you were interested in sort of Western art history, almost exclusively from a historical point of view, not thinking about sort of modern or contemporary art history. And so I had a strong desire and urge to claim an art historical education that would be more holistic and that would include me and people that I identify with as well. So I was, ceramics just as a material, there was a seduction there. It's to me the surface of the material, the body linen, it's very bodily. And then I started looking into the history of the material, and I realized that if you were to study art history through the lens of ceramics, you have to start in China with some of the oldest found ceramic pieces that are like 40,000, 30,000 years old. This is as old as the Venuses in Willenburg, for example, that are seen as some of the oldest sculptures that we have, right? And then you have to go to Japan, Korea, India has a huge ceramic tradition in Africa, right? Those beautiful terracotta heads of Ife. Yeah, that was also a big revelation. And then the sort of the whole American continent, wonderful ceramic traditions, bountiful art history there, and then you land in Europe, and that was I claimed that education. That was a compliment, so it balanced out what I was being taught in college. And I have to say that there was also, of course, I was very lucky to land in the ceramic studio at Hunter College, because there was an ecosystem of other students, but also very importantly professors and mentors who were claiming this education for themselves too.
Okay. We're in the right context at the right moment.
Yes.
That makes a difference.
So we were doing this together. It wasn't a single effort, right? And then, of course, from another standpoint, ceramics, there is an ancient medium, and in the kiln, in the ceramic kiln, the geothermal processes of the earth are reproduced in a much faster scale. Ceramics is basically like a sedimentary rock deposited with other minerals depending on the composition. You can't, it is a natural material that has a very direct connection to everything that has ever lived on this planet, because it contains the materials that have been altered and shifted and deposited through geological processes, but also through the fossilization of organic matter. So that is my particular connection to Earth, right? Ana Mendieta's connection to Earth was then a reclaiming of this connection to what she saw as sort of this sort of maternal matrix of our planet.
A question has been lingering since last December, when we did our geological tour, when you invited me to offer, together with you, in conversation with you, a geological tour in the context of the Stranger in the Village exhibition at the Aargauer Kunsthaus. And I remember us standing in front of this magnificent and huge work by Omar Ba. And we just alluded to the concept of magic realism. And I would like to come back to that moment and expand a little bit on this concept by asking, what is your working understanding of the concept of magic realism, and how does it play within your work and artistic practice?
So for me, magical realism, there's of course the first association is that generation of Latin American writers that sort of made a very popular concept, right? We're talking about Isabel Allende, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Mario Vargas Llosa, Alejo Carpentier. The list is long and fabulous. Lots of great minds on that list. But also thinking about Bryce, the Caribbean poet, who talks about magical realism in the context of the Caribbean as being a way of not going mad, because the reality is so much more absurd and magical than anything anyone could almost come up with, right? So for me, magical realism is very much a way of contemplating alternative possibilities of reality, but still keeping your feet on the ground. You're still operating within the realm in which we inhabit, but there are elements in it that create alternate perspectives. Yeah.
The goal is not to escape in the dreamy, unconscious, magical, whatever. It's to kind of understand better where we are, and
it's also it's a tool in a way. It's a thinking exercise in dealing with sort of absurd or incredible, sort of when the odds are stacked against you in a very sort of prominent way, when there's like structure and social problems that are like, you know, great and prevalent. It is a mechanism for dealing with that reality and finding maybe ways of resistance, ways of resilience that are not where you really have to engage your imagination and your way of thinking in alternative ways.
Yes.
I think that's how I've internalized magical realism.
And how, like, does it have a direct effect? Does it shape directly your artistic practice, or it works in the background?
I think magical realism, because I read a lot of those books when I was too young to read them.
Okay.
I have a very generous mother, let's put it that way. It influenced my way of thinking about possibility and also of observing reality outside of this very linear, very structured, sort of patriarchal scientific, Western scientific concepts that created a very sort of a reality that had to make sense within this constraints of the linear time and this particular perspectives that are also kind of geared towards a result, and you know, they have their functionality as well, but magical realism allowed me to develop, or how to say it, I think the most important thing it actually did for me was to allow me to give validity to my thoughts and intuitions that were the most against the grain of this ordered reality.
Yes.
Because if Isabel Allende can write about this fantastical, almost impossible creatures and peoples, then my more fantastical, almost impossible intuitions about how we are connected to everything, about reality, then can have a validity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I would say that's a great way to really summarize it in a concise way. And actually, you briefly touching the aspect of like scientific knowledge brings me back to another, in my opinion, quite burning questions I had that I didn't have the chance to ask yet. So I would love to come back to that. In fact, from my first encounter with your art, as I have already told you, I have been quite mesmerized by your poetic visual vocabulary, which takes, I would say, quite a direct formal and conceptual inspiration from what I interpret as a fertile but also critical dialogue with different scientific fields and concepts and theories. And I'd like to know if and how within this dialogue there is also a strive to reappropriate, reinscribe, re-signify also, if you will, on the harms that distorted scientific and pseudoscientific thoughts have caused over time on the image, the social roles, and ultimately, you know, the lives of Afro-diasporic people or people who have been racialized and marginalized based on that.
Yeah, so I have a lifelong passion for the natural sciences. The soundtrack of my childhood is basically Jacques Cousteau and Sir David Attenborough, and of course also a lot of science fiction works that are very strongly based in the natural sciences. But of course, part of the issue that my work tackles is that through natural sciences, there was a lot of European scientists who participated in the colonialist project through their hierarchical classification of people based on the melanin content of their skin and on other superficial or soft tissue features, right? So this sort of hierarchical categorization is a ideological heritage of colonialism that permeates so much of our culture, how we looked at each other, we talk about each other, both I could go on. But I think it's important for me to engage with problematic figures such as Ernst Haeckel, right? I've looked at Kunstformen in the Natur, art forms in nature, quite a bit in my work, because not only was Haeckel a very problematic figure in the ways in which he propagated disparaging ideas about melanated people and sort of reinforced this hierarchical classification, he was also one of the people that really spread Darwin's ideas of evolution, also through his very sort of focus study of radiolarians and all the wonderful resulting etchings. There was a shift in a lot of people's mindsets of understanding and recognizing the richness of microbial life and also the complexity of other living organisms, and understanding that we are not the center of everything. This sort of hyper focus on this anthropocenic perspective is not necessarily the most productive perspective, right? However, yes, Haeckel and many other scientists are very problematic figures, but I think for me it's more fruitful to stay with the trouble and utilize part of their research to inspire and gather material for my work, which is an invitation to think completely outside of the ideas they propagated. I think there's a poetic justice in a person such as me that they would have seen as lesser than, using their work as a stepping stone to debunk their failed ideas. Also, of course, I'm not a scientist. I am inspiring myself in the work of a lot of contemporary people doing the hard work in science, and disproving all of these ideas, and also not only in that long ago we have disproved that races don't exist, it's not a biological reality, but also through genetic research, phylogenetics showing the close connectedness, familiarity that we have with everything else that lives in our planet, but also with each other as one of the mammals that has the least genetic diversity. And also, pushing our understanding of this connectedness.
I love your use of the expression poetic justice. It is poetic justice, it is artistic and visual justice. It is a way not only to say that was written, those convictions were totally and absolutely wrong, but it's also saying this is why, and now you're listening to me, and now we're talking about it, and now we are confronting it, and now we are reinscribing it in a way that is then, that can be then eradicated for a better understanding.
And also staying with the trouble in a sense is also engaging I think it's very important to engage people we don't agree with.
I agree with that.
Particularly in the current political climate, as an American citizen, I feel that there is an importance in engaging with those whom we don't agree with without completely discounting them.
Yeah. It's not always easy,
yes.
But I do agree that then the work, the deconstruction can be really done. Laura, I thank you very much. I am kind of at the end of my burning questions, and we have had the chance to sit here, share this moment, and share this space together for a while. So much is resonating, and although I did really try to come prepared to my to this conversation, and I had the pleasure to read on all your references and so on and so forth. A lot of further layers and nuances and connections emerged, and that was really that is sitting, and I will have to elaborate on it. But there's a deep joy here, I would say. So thank you for that.
For me too, really. Thank you. I think that there is one of the greatest gifts of being social animals that have evolved all of these ways of communicating is being able to really and fully be informed by your commonality with your peers, right? And I think that's, I really appreciate our collaboration and glad that we, made our own table.
We made our own